My husband willed his empire to me. My stepson sued, alleging I was an uneducated housewife who manipulated him. He retained the city's best attorney to crush me. As I walked into the courtroom, the opposing lawyer went ashen, let his briefcase drop, and bowed. "It's really you?" I can't believe it. Stepson had no clue who I really was. Have you ever been completely underestimated? Dismissed as nothing? Well, picture this. I walk into a courtroom, my stepson's expensive lawyer is about to tear me apart, claiming I'm just an uneducated housewife. Then he sees me, drops his briefcase, and bows. What on earth happened next? My name is Marcia, and on that day, I was 67 years old, feeling every single one of them. For 6 months, ever since my beloved Richard passed, my world had been so quiet. Every morning, I'd make coffee in his favorite mug, sit at our kitchen table, and just breathe in the silence. It was a silence that sometimes felt like it would swallow me whole. Our beautiful house, filled with 20 years of happy memories, now felt too big, too empty. Then, the doorbell rang. A young man, looking terribly serious in his cheap suit, handed me an envelope. My heart knew immediately it was trouble. "Legal documents," he said. "Sign here." My hands, still trembling from grief, barely held the paper steady as I read. It was Trevor, my stepson. He was contesting Richard's will. He claimed I'd manipulated his father, that I was just a gold digger, an opportunist who took advantage of an old man. Undue influence, the papers screamed. I sank into Richard's worn leather armchair, the one where he always read his evening paper, and the world just tilted. 20 years of marriage, 20 years of building a life, of loving this family, and this is how it ended? The courthouse. Oh, that smell of old wood and desperation. I walked those cold marble halls, my simple navy dress the same one I'd worn to Richard's funeral. My little purse felt like a shield, but every single step echoed, making me feel smaller, more invisible. Trevor was already there, at a polished mahogany table that probably cost more than my car. He was all sleek charcoal suit, slicked back hair, and that smug, arrogant smirk I'd grown to hate over the years. Next to him sat Jonathan Pierce, the city's shark, his reputation a thunderclap. 300 an hour, people whispered. The best money can buy. Me? I had no lawyer. Couldn't afford one without touching the inheritance Trevor was trying to steal. The bailiff called, "All rise," and Judge Hamilton walked in. He looked serious, seen it all. Pierce began his opening statement, his voice smooth, practiced, the kind that could make lies sound like gospel. "Your Honor, we are here today because a calculating woman exploited an aging widower's loneliness." My blood ran cold. The few spectators murmured their disapproval. Pierce painted me as a predator, a gold digger. "Mrs. Stone," he sneered, making my name sound like dirt, married the deceased after a suspiciously brief courtship. No children of her own. No career to speak of. No independent income. She was, by all accounts, nothing more than a housewife, utterly dependent. Trevor, meanwhile, just leaned back, that same obnoxious smirk he'd worn since he was 12. 12! I remembered trying so hard with him then, making his favorite pancakes, helping with homework he never wanted help with, sitting through school plays where he'd pretend not to see me. Pierce went on, "Mrs. Stone isolated the deceased from his son, ensuring her position as sole beneficiary of an estate worth $8.5 million. The number just hung there, like a weapon. Richard's money, it was never about the money for me. It was just there, like the air we breathed. It allowed us to live, to build a life where I took care of him, of our home." Judge Hamilton pressed Pierce, "And what evidence do you have of this manipulation?" Pierce rattled off documentation, phone records, witness statements from neighbors. I wanted to scream. Those discouraged visits were because Trevor only showed up when he needed money. Those phone records? They were me, calling him, begging him to come see his dying father one last time. But how do you explain love in a courtroom? How do you prove 20 years of care in legal jargon? Pierce waved a hand at me. Your Honor, a classic case of elder abuse. A woman with no marketable skills, no education beyond high school, who latched onto a vulnerable man. Then, Trevor spoke, and it felt like a physical blow. She is just a housewife. He laughed, a cruel, echoing sound. Your Honor, look at her. She can barely manage her own finances. The courtroom went dead silent. Judge Hamilton's face was neutral, but I saw something flicker in his eyes. He asked, Mrs. Stone, do you have legal representation? My legs felt like jelly. Slowly, I stood. No, Your Honor. I'm representing myself. He wrote a note. And your response to these allegations? My throat was sandpaper. How do you condense 20 years of morning coffees, evening wines, birthday dinners, 2 surgeries, countless doctor's appointments, holding his hand through everything, into legal terms? Your Honor, I said, I loved my husband. Everything I did was to make him happy. I never asked for his money. I never even wanted it. Trevor snorted. Right. That's why you married a man 23 years older than you. I married Richard, my voice growing stronger, because he was kind. Because he treated me with respect. Because after my first marriage ended, he showed me what real love looked like. Pierce, scrambling, mentioned a neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who'd supposedly heard me discussing the will. My stomach dropped. Mrs. Chen, she found me crying on the porch, after Richard's diagnosis, when the doctor said he had maybe 6 months left. I was terrified, not of losing money, but of losing Richard. Of being alone. But how would that sound to a jury? Judge Hamilton adjourned for the day, advising me to get legal counsel. As Trevor and Pierce laughed together, the weight of their dismissive words crushed me. Gold-digging housewife. In my cheap dress. But as I finally got up to leave, something began to stir inside me. Something that had been dormant for 20 years. Something that remembered who I was before I was Richard's wife. Trevor thought he knew me. Pierce thought he could destroy me. They had no idea who they were dealing with. That evening, I was in Richard's study, surrounded by our life. His law books, photos from our travels, everything felt so fragile, like Trevor's accusations could just erase 20 years of happiness. I poured myself a glass of Richard's special Merlot, the one he'd saved for an occasion that never came. Asterisk just a. Housewife asterisk, I whispered to the empty room. The words tasted like ash. But, was I always just a housewife? My fingers traced the spines of those law books. I remembered when I had my own collection. When I wore power suits instead of aprons. When people stood when I entered a room. That life felt so distant, sometimes I wondered if I'd dreamed it all. The phone rang, startling me. A reporter. Word was out. Tomorrow, I'd be splashed across the news, the wicked stepmother. I looked at myself in the mirror, gray hair in a bun, lines of worry, wearing that same modest dress. Yes. I looked exactly like just a housewife. But then, as I put my wedding ring away, my fingers brushed against something else. A tiny key, tucked away. The key to Richard's locked desk drawer. For emergencies, he'd told me years ago. When you need to remember who you really are. I never understood it. Until now. Back in the study, my hands shook with a mix of fear and something else, anticipation. The key clicked. Inside, a manila folder, Marcia, personal. It held documents I hadn't seen in 20 years. My law degree, from Harvard. Newspaper clippings from my early career. A photo of me, the youngest Superior Court judge in the state's history. Letters of recommendation from legal giants. And at the bottom, Richard's handwriting, my dearest Marcia, I know you sacrificed everything for us. But your talents were never wasted. They were just sleeping, waiting for the day you'd need them again. You are the strongest, most brilliant woman I've ever known. Don't let anyone, not even our son, convince you otherwise. All my love, Richard. The tears came then, a flood. Richard knew. He always knew. He'd kept my secret safe until I was ready to reclaim it. 15 years. I'd been Judge Margaret Stone for 15 years. Presided over the most complex, high-profile cases. They called me the Iron Judge, brilliant, incorruptible, feared. But then I met Richard. He was a widower, raising 12-year-old Trevor alone. He didn't know Judge Stone. To him, I was just Marcia, the woman who made him laugh again. For the first time, I chose love over law. I retired early, became Mrs. Richard Stone. A stepmother to a grieving boy who resented me, but needed stability. 20 years. PTA meetings, school plays, family dinners. 20 years being the woman behind the man. I told myself it was worth it. Love was worth any sacrifice. But that night, surrounded by who I used to be, something ignited. Not just anger, but a fierce fire that remembered the courtroom, the power, the command. I pulled out my laptop, something Richard had insisted I learn. And I did something I hadn't done in 2 decades, I researched. Case law. Inheritance disputes. Undue influence. My fingers flew across the keyboard, muscle memory. Trevor's case? Tissue paper. Pierce had nothing but emotional manipulation and circumstantial evidence. No proof of coercion. No diminished capacity. Just a son's resentment. But sympathy doesn't win cases. Evidence does. I was remembering how to find it. I spent the rest of the night devouring Richard's papers, but this time, not as a wife, but as a lawyer. His will? Ironclad. His medical records? Clear. His financial advisor's notes? Detailed, showing Richard's concerns about Trevor's spending. And then, his private journal. Page after page of his love for me, his disappointment in Trevor. The last entry, a week before his death, Marcia thinks she gave up everything for me, but she has no idea how proud I am of what she accomplished. Trevor will try to hurt her, but my Marcia is stronger than she knows. She's forgotten what she's capable of, but I haven't. She's going to surprise everyone. I closed the journal. This wasn't just Richard's study. It was mine, too. And tomorrow, I wouldn't walk in as just a housewife. I'd walk in as Judge Margaret Stone. Trevor thought he could intimidate me. He thought I was just the woman who'd cooked his dinners. He was about to learn just how wrong he was. Day 2. I walked into that courtroom, same navy dress, but this time my spine was straighter. My steps, steadier. The grieving housewife was still there, yes, but something fierce had awakened. Trevor and Pierce were already there, smugly confident. Pierce, bored, as if he'd already won. Trevor with that infuriating smirk. Judge Hamilton came in, and I noticed the precision in his movements. Like a young attorney, eager, trembling, in my old courtroom. Mr. Pierce, Judge Hamilton said, call your first witness. Pierce called Mrs. Elizabeth Chin, my neighbor. My stomach clenched. I'd helped her with groceries, brought her soup. But as she sat down, she wouldn't meet my eyes. Pierce, like a predator, approached. Mrs. Chin, can you tell the court about a conversation with Mrs. Stone regarding the inheritance? My heart hammered. I knew what was coming. It was about 2 months before Richard died, she stammered. I found her crying on her porch. She was upset about his diagnosis, the cancer, and she said she was scared of what would happen when he was gone, that Trevor would probably try to take it all away. The courtroom was dead silent. Pierce let her words hang in the air, a poisonous smoke. No further questions, he gloated. Judge Hamilton looked at me. Mrs. Stone, cross-examine? I stood. My legs steady. Something wasn't panic, it was calculation. Yes, Your Honor. I approached Mrs. Chen. She flinched. Poor woman. She had no idea she was about to be my first exhibit. Mrs. Chen, I said, my voice calm, you testified I was crying. Why? She blinked. Because Richard was dying. Specifically, I pressed, what had we just learned that day? Pierce objected, but Judge Hamilton waved him off. I'll allow it. Mrs. Chen looked confused. The doctor had told you both, the treatments weren't working. 6 weeks left. 6 weeks? I repeated, letting the words sink in. Mrs. Chen, in your opinion, was I crying because my husband was dying, or because I was worried about money? Because he was dying, she said, immediately, then her eyes widened as she realized her admission. And when I mentioned being scared, did I say I was scared of being poor, or scared of being alone? Her voice was barely a whisper. You said you were scared of being alone. That you didn't know how to live without him. Thank you, Mrs. Chen. No further questions. As she left, I caught Judge Hamilton watching me. His interest was sharpened. That precision, that control, it didn't fit the helpless housewife. Pierce brought 2 more witnesses, but with each one, my confidence grew. The banker confirmed Richard was reorganizing finances for me to manage. The colleague admitted Richard's confusion was actually frustration with a case. By lunch, I saw doubt in Pierce's eyes. Trevor, though, still smirked. Just before recess, Judge Hamilton said quietly, "You're doing better than expected, Mrs. Stone. But I have to ask, what's your full legal name?" The question hit me like a jolt. My mouth went dry. This was it. The moment I'd been both dreading and anticipating. Margaret Stone, Your Honor. But I go by Marcia. Judge Hamilton's pen froze. His eyes snapped to mine. I saw the exact moment recognition flared. Margaret Stone, he repeated slowly. As in Judge Margaret Stone? The courtroom went dead silent. Trevor's head snapped towards me. Pierce's confident expression shattered. I was Judge Margaret Stone, I said, my voice quiet, but it echoed. I retired 20 years ago. Trevor shot to his feet. What? Impossible. You're just a housewife. Yes, I finished for him, I heard you yesterday. Pierce was whispering frantically to Trevor, both looking like they'd seen a ghost. Judge Hamilton was staring, almost in awe. Your Honor, Pierce stammered, this is the first we're hearing of any legal background. We request time to what? Judge Hamilton's voice was sharp. To research the woman you've been calling an uneducated gold digger? Mr. Pierce, did you not investigate the opposing party? Pierce's face was pure white. We conducted standard background checks, no indication of any legal career. Because I took my husband's name and retired from public life, I stated simply. But my bar membership is still active. I've kept up with continuing education. I am, in fact, qualified to represent myself. The weight of what was happening settled over the room. Trevor looked like he was about to vomit. Pierce shuffled papers, desperate. But Judge Hamilton looked at me with a respect I hadn't felt in 2 decades. Judge Stone, he said, formally, I had the honor of appearing before your court as a young attorney. You were formidable. I gave a small smile. I tried to be fair, Your Honor. You were both fair and brilliant. He turned to Pierce. Mr. Pierce, I suggest you use the lunch recess to reconsider your strategy. Court reconvenes at 2. As the courtroom emptied, I remained seated, feeling the incredible transformation. The mask I'd worn for 20 years was slipping. Judge Margaret Stone was waking up. Trevor stormed over, face twisted with rage. This is impossible. Judges don't just become housewives. I looked up at him. Not as his stepmother, not as the woman who desperately wanted his love, but as the judge who'd spent 15 years seeing through liars and manipulators. Some of us, I said, my voice quiet, cutting, choose love over power, Trevor. But that doesn't mean we forgot how to fight when we need to. His mouth just opened and closed. Behind him, Pierce was on his phone, frantic. As I walked up for lunch, I felt lighter than I had in months. The grief for Richard was still there, but underneath? The thrill of the hunt. The satisfaction of watching a weak case crumble. Judge Margaret Stone was back. And she was ready for war. The afternoon session felt different. Word had spread like wildfire. The hushed conversations, the curious stares, the local legal community was small, and the return of Judge Margaret Stone was news. Trevor looked like a deflated balloon. Pierce kept glancing at me like he'd brought a knife to a gunfight. Judge Hamilton's gaze, though, held something new, deference. "Mrs. Stone," he said, "will you continue representing yourself?" I stood. For the first time in 20 years, the full weight of my professional authority settled on my shoulders like a perfectly tailored coat. "Yes, Your Honor. I believe I'm adequately qualified." A ripple of laughter, quickly suppressed. Judge Hamilton's lips twitched. "I think that's safe to say." Pierce, wanting to disappear, called Trevor to the stand. This was going to be interesting. I'd seen Trevor lie his whole life. But he'd never faced a cross-examination from someone who'd spent 15 years spotting deception from the bench. Trevor took the oath, trying to maintain his swagger, but he kept glancing at me nervously. Pierce carefully guided him through his sad tale, the distant relationship, the sudden marriage, the isolation. "Did Mrs. Stone deliberately interfere?" Pierce asked. "Absolutely," Trevor exclaimed, warming up. "She was always there, hovering, making it clear I wasn't welcome." "Give us an example," Pierce urged. Trevor's eyes lit up. "Last Christmas. I visited for 3 days, and she scheduled every minute. Shopping, dinner parties, movies. When I tried to talk to Dad alone, she always interrupted." Pierce nodded sympathetically. "How did that make you feel?" "Like she was deliberately keeping me from my father. Afraid of what he'd say." It was a compelling performance. Yesterday's grieving housewife might have crumbled. But I wasn't her anymore. "Mr. Pierce," Judge Hamilton said, "your witness." I approached Trevor, my steps measured. He tried to hold his confident facade, but I saw the cracks. "Trevor," I said, my voice carrying an authority I hadn't known I still possessed. "You testified you visited your father last Christmas for 3 days. Correct?" "Yes." "And before that, when did you last see him?" He shifted. "I don't remember exactly." "Let me refresh your memory." I pulled out Richard's meticulously kept calendar. "Your last visit before Christmas was 14 months earlier." "Accurate?" "Maybe." "We talked on the phone." "How often?" He shifted again. "Regularly." "Trevor, I'm holding your father's phone records." I handed them over. "How many times did you call him in the 6 months before his death?" He stared, flushing. These might not be complete." "They are complete, Trevor." "The answer is 3 times. 3 calls in 6 months, each under 10 minutes. Does that match your definition of regularly?" Pierce jumped up. "Objection. Mrs. Stone is testifying." "Sustained," Judge Hamilton said, but his voice lacked disapproval. "Rephrase, Mrs. Stone." I gave a small smile. 20 years, but the rhythm of courtroom combat was like riding a bicycle. Trevor, based on these records, would you say you were in close, regular contact with your father? We had a complicated relationship, he mumbled defensively. Indeed. Now, about those activities I supposedly scheduled to prevent private conversations. What shopping was that? He looked confused. I don't remember. It was for your father's specialized medications, which required a 30-mile trip. The dinner parties was one 75th birthday surprise party, which you'd forgotten until I reminded you. And the movies were old 1940s films Richard loved, but he had severe hearing loss. Were you aware of that in his final months? His mouth opened, closed. No. So, when you interpreted my presence as interference, is it possible I was actually helping your father hear what you were saying? The courtroom was silent. The jurors, Pierce's mistake, leaned forward. And Trevor, I continued, my voice softening just slightly, you mentioned being made to feel unwelcome at your father's house when you arrived for that Christmas visit. Where did you sleep? In my old room. The room I'd spent 3 weeks preparing for your visit? Hung your baseball trophies? Put out fresh flowers and your favorite snacks? His face was bright red. Now, you. I don't remember. Let me ask you directly, Trevor. In all the years I was married to your father, did I ever ask you not to visit? Tell you you weren't welcome? No. Did I ever refuse to? Cook your favorite meals? Fail to include you in family photos, holidays? No. His voice was barely audible. Trevor, is it possible your feelings had more to do with your grief over your mother's death than with anything I actually did? Pierce was on his feet again. Objection. Psychological evaluation. I gave Judge Hamilton a ghost of a smile. Withdrawn, Your Honor. I'll rephrase. Trevor, when you were 12 and I married your father, what did you call me? Trevor looked like he wanted to vanish. I don't remember. You called me the replacement, I said, quietly. And later, when your father asked you to be kinder, you said, and I quote, she'll never be my real mom. So why should I pretend to like her? The silence was deafening. I saw tears in several jurors' eyes. Trevor, I'm not trying to humiliate you. But I need this court to understand, I spent 20 years trying to earn your love, not steal your father's. I never asked him to choose. I just asked him to let me love you both. Trevor was sobbing now, gut-wrenching sobs. You don't understand, he choked. He loved you more than he ever loved me. More than my mother. I saw it every time he looked at you. And there it was. The truth, festering for 20 years. Trevor, I said gently, love isn't a finite resource. Your father's love for me didn't diminish his love for you. It just made our family bigger. Judge Hamilton watched, spellbound. Pierce looked like he wanted to crawl under his table. But Trevor, you're not here because you miss your father, or because you feel unloved. You're here because you want his money. So, one final question. In the week before your father died, when I called you 6 times, begging you to come say goodbye, why didn't you come? Trevor's sobs intensified. I was busy. I had work. You were in Las Vegas, Trevor, with your girlfriend, gambling away the money your father had given you for rent just the month before. Pierce was frantically searching for an objection. But what could he say? These were facts. Documented. Verifiable. While your father was dying, asking for you every single day, wondering why his son wouldn't come home, you were at poker tables, losing the last money he would ever give you. I let that sink in. The jury absorbed the weight of it all. So, when you stand here and claim I manipulated your father, stole your inheritance, turned him against you, remember, you did all of that yourself. I just loved him enough to hold his hand while he waited for a son who never came home. Trevor completely collapsed, shaking with grief and shame. Judge Hamilton called a recess, but the damage was done. As the courtroom emptied, Pierce approached me, looking like a man facing his execution. "Judge Stone," he whispered, "I think we need to discuss a settlement." I met his gaze with the cold precision that used to make seasoned attorneys sweat. "Mr. Pierce, 24 hours ago, you called me an uneducated housewife who manipulated a dying man. You questioned my intelligence, my integrity, my right to be loved. Now you want to settle?" He swallowed hard. "Perhaps we were overzealous." "Perhaps," I agreed. "But I'm not interested in settling anymore. I'm interested in justice. And I am very, very good at getting it." As Pierce walked away, the last vestiges of the grieving housewife fell away. Judge Margaret Stone had returned. And she was ready for war. The next morning, an unseasonable chill hung in the air, but I felt warm. Word had spread. As I walked, whispered conversations stopped. Respectful nods. The electric hum that surrounds a legend. Trevor looked absolutely haggard, his expensive suit wrinkled, dark circles under his eyes. He'd clearly spent the night wrestling his demons. Pierce sat beside him like a man at his own funeral, scribbling frantically, no salvation in sight. Judge Hamilton entered, knowing he was about to witness history. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "before we continue, let's address the elephant in the room. Yesterday, we learned Mrs. Stone is actually retired Superior Court Judge Margaret Stone." He looked at Pierce. "Mr. Pierce, any motions?" Pierce slowly rose, arrogance replaced by humility. "Your Honor, we move to dismiss all charges of manipulation and undue influence. We acknowledge we were overzealous." A cold smile touched my lips. 24 hours ago, this would have been victory. But something shifted overnight. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about justice. For every woman dismissed, diminished, called just a housewife. Before Pierce could sit, I stood. "Your Honor, I object to the dismissal." Judge Hamilton raised an eyebrow. "Mrs. Stone, you're objecting to winning?" "I'm objecting to settling for less than the full truth, Your Honor." Mr. Pierce and his client made serious allegations about my character, my competence, my right to inherit. This court, and the public record, deserves to hear all the evidence. I saw understanding dawn in Judge Hamilton's eyes. He remembered. "Very well," he said. "Mrs. Stone, present your case." I was ready. "Your Honor," I said, "I call Richard Stone to testify." A murmur went through the room. Pierce shot up. "Objection. The witness is deceased." "Not Richard Stone himself, Mr. Pierce." Richard Stone's voice, preserved in video testimony he recorded 3 months before his death, specifically in case his will was ever contested. The silence was deafening. Trevor's face went white. I handed a tablet with the video file to the bailiff. "My husband was meticulous," I explained. "He understood human nature. He knew his son might challenge this will. He wanted his own voice to speak from beyond the grave." Richard's face appeared on the large screen, gaunt from illness, but his eyes, sharp. "My name is Richard Stone," his recorded voice began, calm, authoritative. "And I am of sound mind and body. I am creating this testimony because I fear that after my death, my son Trevor will attempt to contest my will and vilify my beloved wife Marcia." Trevor slumped. His father's voice filled the room, a presence death couldn't diminish. "Let me be clear. I was never manipulated by Marcia. Every decision regarding my estate was mine alone, made with full knowledge of my son's character." Richard's image leaned forward, looking right at Trevor through the screen. "Trevor, if you're watching this, I loved you. I always loved you. But love doesn't blind a parent. You are irresponsible with money. I've bailed you out 17 times. You cannot hold steady employment despite every advantage. and most painfully, you have shown nothing but contempt for the woman who tried to love you like her own son. Trevor's face crumpled. 20 years of denial crashing down. Marcia sacrificed more for our family than you'll ever understand, Richard continued. She was Judge Margaret Stone, one of the most respected jurists in the state's history. She gave up a career most lawyers only dream of, because she loved me. She cooked your meals, attended your games, helped with your homework, and endured your cruelty with patience I didn't deserve. The courtroom was silent, save for Trevor's soft weeping. I am leaving my estate to Marcia, not because she manipulated me, but because she earned it. 20 years of unwavering devotion. She nursed me through 2 surgeries, held my hand through chemotherapy, never complained. She deserves every penny. Richard's voice softened slightly. Trevor, I pray someday you'll understand your anger wasn't about her. It was about losing your mother, and being afraid to let anyone else love you. That's not Marcia's fault. The video ended. Stunned silence. Jurors wiping eyes. Court reporters shaken. Judge Hamilton cleared his throat. Mr. Pierce, cross-examine this testimony? Pierce looked like he'd aged 10 years. No, Your Honor. No questions. Mrs. Stone, additional evidence? I moved to my table, picking up a thick folder. Yes, Your Honor. I have documentation showing Trevor Stone borrowed approximately $137,000 from his father over the past 15 years, none repaid. Records of 3 different jobs lost to absences. Witnesses to his pattern of appearing only for money. I paused, letting the weight settle like dust after an explosion. But more importantly, Your Honor, I have this. I held up Richard's private journal. My husband's personal thoughts about his son, recorded over his final year. Thoughts that show not manipulation, but heartbreak. Not undue influence, but a father's desperate hope. Trevor was openly sobbing now, shoulders shaking, 20 years of suppressed grief exploding. Your Honor, I said, my voice carrying both legal authority and personal pain. This case was never about money. It was about a young man who couldn't accept his father loved his stepmother alongside him, not instead of him. It was grief turned to greed, entitlement masquerading as injustice. I turned to Trevor. I tried to love you for 20 years, Trevor. I failed, but not for lack of trying. Your father left me his estate because he knew I'd honor his memory. You're challenging that not because you were wronged, but because you feel wronged. And there's a difference. Judge Hamilton leaned forward. Mrs. Stone, what are you asking this court to do? I took a deep breath, the armor of my profession settling firmly. I'm asking this court to uphold Richard Stone's will in its entirety. I'm asking for a judgment that removes any cloud from my inheritance. And I'm asking that Trevor Stone be ordered to repay the $137,000 he borrowed, with appropriate interest. A gasp. Pierce shot up. Your Honor, that's not part of this case. It is now, I said, calmly. Trevor opened this door when he claimed I was financially exploiting his father. I'm simply asking for an accounting of all financial exploitation in this family. Judge Hamilton looked at Trevor with pity. Mr. Stone, how do you respond? Trevor could barely speak. I don't have that kind of money. I can't pay it back. Then perhaps, I said quietly, you shouldn't have borrowed it in the first place. The silence felt like the end of the world. For Trevor, it was. The end of his entitlement, his denial. Judge Hamilton reviewed his notes. When he looked up, his expression was grave. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you've heard extraordinary testimony. Based on the evidence, I'm prepared to issue a directed verdict. He turned to Trevor and Pierce with a stern authority that made me proud. The allegations of undue influence and manipulation are not only unfounded, they are insulting to Richard Stone's memory and deeply harmful to his widow's reputation. Mrs. Stone has proven she is not only competent to inherit, but deserving of it through 2 decades of devotion and sacrifice. His gaze met mine, full of respect. Furthermore, the evidence of financial irresponsibility and emotional manipulation on the part of Trevor Stone is overwhelming. I find in favor of Mrs. Stone on all counts, and I order Trevor Stone to repay the $137,000 in loans, plus interest. Trevor's world was ending. Mine was just beginning again. Judge Margaret Stone was back. And justice had been served. 6 months after the trial, I stood in my new law office, looking out at the city skyline. My brass nameplate read, Margaret Stone, Attorney at Law. It felt right. More right than anything had felt in 20 years. My inheritance case had been huge news. Not just for the courtroom drama, but for what came after. Within weeks, I was getting calls. Dozens of them. From women just like me, widows, stepmothers, just housewives who'd sacrificed careers for love, only to be dismissed, diminished, and fought over an inheritance. I started taking cases again. Pro bono, for women who couldn't afford high-powered lawyers. Word spread, Judge Margaret Stone was back, and she was fighting for the underestimated. My secretary buzzed, Mrs. Stone, your 3 o'clock is here. In walked a woman in her early 60s, well-dressed, but clutching her purse like a shield. I knew that look. It was the same one I'd worn entering that courtroom 6 months ago. Mrs. Morrison, I said, please have a seat. Her hands trembled. I'm not sure you can help me, Mrs. Stone. My situation is complicated. I leaned back. Mrs. Morrison, I've learned the most complicated situations often have the simplest solutions. Tell me what's happening. My husband died 3 months ago. His children from his first marriage are claiming I brainwashed him, that I'm just a gold digger. It was the same old song. And the truth? She looked up, eyes full of pain. The truth is, I gave up my nursing career to raise his teenage daughters. I nursed him through diabetes, heart surgery, depression. And now they want to paint me as a predator. I nodded, taking notes. Do you have documentation of your contributions? Financial records, medical records, anything? I kept everything, she said. Receipts. Medical appointments. Bank statements showing my nursing salary went to household expenses. Even letters from him, thanking me for my sacrifices. I smiled. The familiar thrill of a winnable case. Mrs. Morrison, I think we're going to get along very well. She left an hour later, armed with a strategy and renewed confidence. My life had changed so much. The grief for Richard was still there, but it no longer defined me. I'd found purpose. A reason to get up that wasn't just about surviving. My phone buzzed. A text. The caller ID made my stomach clench. Trevor, Marcia, can we talk? I've been thinking about what you said in court. I stared at it for a long moment. Coffee tomorrow, 10 a.m. Brewers on 5th Street. The next morning, I arrived early, watching for him. When he appeared, I was struck. No arrogant swagger. No expensive suit. No smirk. He looked humbled. Older. Like he'd finally seen some uncomfortable truths. He approached hesitantly. Marcia, thank you for agreeing to see me. Sit down, Trevor. We sat in silence until his coffee arrived. I owe you an apology, he finally said, clearing his throat. More than an apology. I don't know what I owe you. I studied his face, looking for manipulation. But I saw genuine remorse. And something I'd never seen from him, humility. You don't owe me anything, Trevor. Your father already paid all the debts that mattered. He winced. That video, hearing him talk about me, it was like seeing myself through someone else's eyes for the first time. And what did you see? He stared into his coffee. A spoiled, entitled brat who threw away 20 years trying to earn love I never deserved. Something softened in my chest. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something. Trevor, you were 12 when I married your father. 12-year-olds don't know how to process grief, or how to make room for new people. But I never tried, he choked. Not once in 20 years did I really try. And the worst part is, I can see now, you never stopped trying with me. We sat in silence. What happens now? He asked. Now, I said, you figure out who you want to be. Your father's trust fund gives you $24,000 a year. Not extravagant, but enough to supplement an honest income while you find your way. He nodded. I got a job. Bookkeeping. It's honest work. They don't know about the trust fund or the lawsuit. I'm just Trevor Stone, the guy who shows up on time. That was significant progress. How does that feel? Terrifying. And liberating. I've never had to be responsible for myself. Dad always bailed me out. I knew he'd never let me truly fail. I found myself genuinely curious about this new Trevor. And now I have to succeed or fail on my own merits. It's the first time I've ever tried to earn something, instead of just expecting it. We talked for another hour, carefully navigating decades of hurt. Not forgiveness, not yet. But a beginning. As we left, Trevor hesitated. Marcia, there's something else. I've been in therapy, trying to understand why I was so angry. I realized. I wasn't angry at you for taking Dad's love away. I was angry at you for showing me what real love looked like and realizing I'd never learned how to give it. His words hit me like a physical blow. After 20 years of believing he hated me, the truth was devastating. He'd been afraid. Trevor, I said, tears pricking my eyes, you were a child. You weren't supposed to know how to love like that yet. But I'm not a child anymore. And if there's any chance at all we could figure out how to be a family, I'd like to try. I looked at this man who'd been my stepson, but never truly family. And I saw something new, genuine vulnerability. It would take time, I said carefully. A lot of hurt to work through. I have time. And if you're willing, I'd like to start by getting to know the woman who was important enough for my father to change his entire will to protect. I stood to leave. At the door, I turned back. Trevor, your father loved you. He never stopped. Not even when he was disappointed. I hope you know that. His eyes filled. I'm starting to. 6 months later, I stood in the same courtroom. This time, representing a 72-year-old woman whose stepchildren were trying to declare her incompetent. The opposing counsel, young and cocky, thought it would be an easy win against an elderly widow. They had no idea who they were dealing with. As I rose to deliver my opening statement, I felt the full weight of my authority, my experience, my purpose. I was Judge Margaret Stone, attorney at law. Protector of the underestimated. Defender of the dismissed. I was exactly where I belonged. Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I began, my voice confident, clear. This case is about more than an inheritance. It's about a society that assumes a woman's worth diminishes with age, that believes a widow's grief makes her an easy target for exploitation. I paused, letting my eyes sweep the courtroom. Today, we're going to prove them wrong. Behind me, in the gallery, sat Mrs. Morrison, whose case I'd won. Next to her, Mrs. Chen, who'd become an advocate. And in the back row, nervous but proud, sat Trevor. My family. Not the one I was born into, or married into, but the one I'd built through battle, through loss, through the decision to stop hiding who I really was. The phoenix had risen from the ashes. And she was ready to fight. Now, after hearing my story, I have to ask you, what would you have done in my place? Have you ever had to fight for your worth, for your identity? Tell me what you think in the comments below. I really want to know.